Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan, and today I want to finally talk about something I've been meaning to talk to you guys about for a very long time. It's the movie Avatar. While I always appreciate a good sci-fi movie, especially one with a deep and profound message about the state of mankind, Avatar, while cinematically one of the most beautiful pictures of its time, was also one of the cringiest, with very lazy and blunt one-liners like,
"Our only security lies in preemptive attack. We will fight terror with terror."
I mean, the movie even pissed off Native Americans who thought that James Cameron just ripped off their culture and turned Native Americans into giant blue aliens who still need a white guy to turn into one of them in order to save them. For many, it's just The Last of the Mohicans, Dancing with the Wolves, or The Last Samurai all over again, but with giant blue aliens. Now, I'm not against messaging in movies, especially when it comes to anti-war messaging. I think it's important to remind people that warfare represents the ultimate failure of our species, and it's really a last resort weapon that should not be carelessly wielded. But making a movie is a craft, and when you completely abandon your story in favor of regurgitating cliche slogans that are completely immersion-shattering, you'll lose me. And that's how I really consume media. Whenever I feel the artist actively pushing me in one direction, I'm very curious of what's going on in the other direction. Which is why I began realizing that all of the humans that James Cameron was demonizing in the movie were not actually the bad guys in the movie, they're actually the heroes. And here are some reasons why. By 2129, the majority of Earth's wildlife and forests have been destroyed as a result of human overpopulation and massive worldwide urbanization. The Resource Development Administration, which started up as a humble Silicon Valley startup tech company, first made a global impact by building a worldwide monorail system to allow cheap, safe, and quick transportation for everyone. And as the world's natural resources dried up, the RDA created massive algae farms in the oceans to create the necessary sustenance for sustaining the life of 20 billion humans on the planet. A global war in the 22nd century further strained the resources of the planet, and more importantly, the energy on the planet was almost completely depleted. Humanity had colonized Mars for more space, but still our species was on the verge of dying. We needed more energy to fuel our expansion across the galaxy. By this point, the RDA was as powerful as most governments on Earth. They launched a desperate and costly mission to the nearest star system of Alpha Centauri to the moon of Pantora in order to gather a resource that is named unobtainium. Unobtainium is a mineral that was a room temperature superconductor that produced an incredibly strong magnetic field, which is why there were floating mountains all over the place on Pantora. Unobtainium was a crucial component of the antimatter reactors used by human starships at the time, and with enough unobtainium, humanity could become a true spacefaring race. The mission to Pantora was in many ways humanity's last hope. Without more resources, massive famines and infighting between the different nations would destroy what's left of the planet. Pantora was a strange new world for humanity. Although there was oxygen in the atmosphere, high levels of carbon dioxide made the air toxic for humans to breathe in. The moon was covered in massive jungles full of all sorts of exotic and dangerous flora and fauna. A large percentage of the species were bioluminescent and created light far more intense than anything we have here on Earth. The RDA first encountered the locals known as the Na'vi. These were extremely tall humanoids that lived in hunter-gatherer communities. Their tech level was equivalent to the Earth's Paleolithic epoch. Initially, the RDA attempted to communicate with the Na'vi, but the cultural and language differences made this almost impossible. Eventually, the Avatar program was created, which allowed humans to pilot Na'vi bodies and live and walk amongst the Na'vi without endangering humans to hostile environments and occasionally hostile Na'vi. The RDA even set up schools to teach the Na'vi about human culture and language with varying degrees of success, but ultimately this exchange of ideas ended up in failure as the Na'vi continued attacking RDA outposts and vehicles. This unfortunately led to the massacre of several young Na'vi hunters at one of the schoolhouses after they had torched several bulldozers. The RDA had hoped by being able to communicate with the Na'vi, they would be able to negotiate terms and peacefully mine on the planet. Now, the Na'vi are often portrayed as beautiful, peace-loving species, but like most generalizations, they were far more complicated than the public's romanticization of them. For one, the Na'vi were massive compared to human beings. As adults, they grew up to 12 feet tall and were extremely strong and limber. A grown Na'vi could easily throw a human far enough to kill them. The iconic image of a noble savage with a bow and arrow facing against evil humans with firearms is also a bit misleading. The bows and arrows they used were closer in size to the ballistas used by ancient Roman armies as siege weapons. These weapons they used easily dwarfed even the tallest longbows, and the arrows were more like giant spears. Many humans lost their lives in horrific ways because they were unaware initially of the Na'vi's customs and boundaries. While the Na'vi were very in tune with their planet and all the wildlife around it, they were also very territorial and extremely adept hunters, and their society had a very vibrant and proud warrior culture. And as the RDA and the Na'vi had more encounters, it was only inevitable for more bloodshed to occur. By the time Jake Sully had arrived, the Na'vi were firing on human vehicles without warning, heavily increasing the need for security on the planet. In truth, there was a lot that humanity could learn from Na'vi about their moon. We could have learned about the complicated bio-network that linked all life on Pantora together. But the Na'vi could have learned even more from us. Their society was extremely primitive, and although they had amazing rituals that could even transfer consciousness from one being to another, they didn't have a process like the scientific method to figure out and record their findings. It was for this reason why the Na'vi were still hunters and gatherers. Without the ability to grow food and develop agriculture, the majority of their people's energy was spent on obtaining food. Agriculture allows communities to have free time, during which new ideas and inventions can be created. This is how humanity formed things like laws or science and art. Without progress, the Na'vi would have been doomed one way or another from some celestial event or natural disaster. What the humans had to offer was enlightenment, but the Na'vi rejected any exchange in culture. Because of the structure of their society, the Na'vi warriors and hunters were valued above everyone else in the tribe. This meant that the strong young males could choose whatever women they wanted to be with. This was a society that valued strength and power above intellect and progress. The fact that there were very few elderly and sick people in their population goes to show you how hard life was. Life expectancy for the Na'vi was needlessly short in comparison to more developed societies. And again, this is because in primitive societies where physicality is more important than intelligence, oftentimes weaker and smarter individuals are not allowed to contribute to the tribe. And let's also not forget that the same tail neural network they use during mating sessions with each other, they also use on unsuspecting animals. We have a name for that on Earth, it's called bestiality, and although not enough areas of the world outlaw this, it's generally frowned upon. But for the Na'vi, it's a rite of passage. Pandora was a massive moon, closer in size to a planet than our own moon. The Earth has a diameter of 12,700 kilometers, while Pandora has a diameter of 11,447 kilometers. But the Na'vi population couldn't have numbered more than a few million. This was rumored to be because of a sentient intelligence worshipped by the Na'vi called Iwa. Iwa maintained a careful ecological balance on the planet and culled the Na'vi population if they grew too large in numbers. So this actually meant that there was plenty of room for the RDA and humans to settle and mine unobtainium. Remember, the entire human race was dependent on this resource for its survival. Now, the fact that some large sentient being was basically playing God and controlling all life on Pantora is actually quite terrifying. If the RDA scientists and xenobiologists had been allowed into the so-called sacred Pandoran neural network areas, they could have examined how it worked. They would have been able to expose their god as some very complex and perhaps malevolent creature. And although I understand the importance of creating a balanced ecosystem, I believe that no sentient being should get to decide whether another sentient being should or should not live. A lot of people who grow up in suburbs or in cities have a very romantic idea of what nature is. The idea of a Pantoran-like society where we all live at the mercy of nature or some godlike entity like Iwa might sound appealing to them. But the reality is quite different. While I agree what humanity has done to the Earth and its natural beauty is horrific and one of our greatest failures, our scientific achievements cannot be overlooked. We as a species were born frail and without physical advantages that would help us survive. The only thing we ever had was a brain and some thumbs, which allowed us to build, create, and innovate. To not pursue the gifts that evolution has bestowed on us would be a great loss of potential. The Na'vi were also born with this ability of higher thinking and function, but they instead succumbed to the authority of some supreme alien entity that carelessly cut them down like blades of grass without reason or empathy. Nature is a beautiful thing and I love it. I spend a third of my year traveling, trekking, and camping and getting as much outdoor experience as possible. But nature is also chaos and brutal. In the wild, animals eat their young, kill the weak and the kind. Only humans have been able to rise above the chaos and establish structure, morality, and innovation. Movies like Avatar with their narrow focus forget that aspect of humanity completely. Ultimately, the Na'vi were able to outnumber and overwhelm the RDA forces on the planet. To their credit, they did not massacre the humans that surrendered, but they did send them back home on their starships, perhaps dooming human civilization. Maybe if the RDA arrived with more scientists and anthropologists, things would have happened differently. Perhaps if the RDA's corporate leaders were under less pressure and had more time to gather the resources they needed, a war could have been averted. I think it's always hard to judge other people's intention, and so whenever I suspect that someone is evil, I also consider the fact that they might just be incompetent, and usually that's a lot closer to the truth. Ultimately, the RDA's expedition was full of humans who wanted to create a better future for their people, and many members of the RDA expedition had children and family back home that were suffocating on Earth. And before you judge the actions of the RDA, let me ask you this question. If your children or your loved ones or your family members were stuck on a dying planet, how far would you go to save them? Anyway, let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, let me know what you think about the RDA. Maybe you like the Na'vi. You're entitled to your opinions. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. We'll probably do a little more Avatar coverage. It's a franchise that I'm definitely interested in, and I'll definitely have more videos and content about it. Anyway, guys, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.